Story 1, Emily Rose. The first person to recognize that Anneliese Michel was possessed by demons was an older woman accompanying the girl on a pilgrimage. She noticed that Anneliese would not walk past a certain image of Jesus, refuse to drink water from a holy spring, and smell bad, hellishly bad. An exorcist in a nearby town examined Michel and returned a diagnosis of demonic possession. The bishop issued permission to perform the rite of exorcism according to the Roman ritual of 1614. Half a year and 67 rites of exorcism later, Anneliese Michel was dead at 23. Anneliese Michel did not die in the Middle Ages, but in 1976, in the small town of Cunningham, in the heart of one of the most civilized and advanced countries in Europe, Germany, 2 years after Michel's death, a German court found her parents and the 2 priests involved guilty of negligent manslaughter and sentenced them to 6 months in prison, suspended with 3 years probation. What shocked Germany most was the fact that it could happen in a country that prides itself on being highly rational and highly secularized. The surprising thing was that the people connected to Michel were all completely convinced that she had really been possessed, says Franz Bartel, amazement still in his voice 3 decades after he covered the story for the regional daily paper Main Post. Many years later, I visited the woman who first diagnosed the devil. Bartel says, "She blessed my microphone with holy water because I was working for the radio then, and it was likely that the devil was in control of the microphone." Michel was raised in a strict Catholic family in Bavaria, which rejected the reforms of Vatican II and flirted with religious fringe groups. While other kids her age were rebelling against authority and experimenting with sex, she tried to atone for the sins of wayward priests and Dr. Asterisk addicts by sleeping on a bare floor in the middle of winter. According to court findings, she experienced her first epileptic attack in 1969, and by 1973 was suffering from depression and considering suicide. Soon she was seeing the faces of demons on the people and things around her, and voices told her she was damned. Under the influence of her demons, Michel ripped the clothes off her body, compulsively performed up to 400 squats a day, crawled under a table and barked like a dog for 2 days, ate spiders and coal, bit the head off a dead bird, and licked her own urine from the floor. By 1975, Michel was asking for an exorcism. The Revs, Ernstald and Arnold Wren, performed the rite 67 times over the first half of 1976. Some of the sessions took up to 4 hours. 42 sessions were recorded on tape. Michel's recorded voice can still send shivers up your spine. It is a voice of a demon, growling, barking, inhuman, and surprisingly like the voice of Linda Blair in The Exorcist, which had been released in Germany 2 years earlier. Sometimes the demons identified themselves as Cain, Nero, Judas, Lucifer, Hitler, and others, and even answered the exorcist's questions, explaining what was wrong with the church or why they were in hell. "People are stupid as pigs," spat Hitler. "They think it's all over after death." It goes on. Judas said Hitler was nothing but a big mouth and had no real say in hell. Anyway, it wasn't the exorcism that killed Anneliese Michel. At some point, she began talking increasingly about dying to atone for the wayward youth of the day and the apostate priests of the modern church, and refused to eat, though she had received treatment for epilepsy. By this time, at her own request, doctors were no longer being consulted. She, her parents, and the exorcist decided to rely completely on exorcism. By the time Michel died of starvation, she weighed only 68 pounds. After her death, the Anneliese Michel trial also set reason against faith. I personally believe that this case was handled in such a way as to play down the reality of the devil, says Norbert Baumert, Jesuit priest and chairman of the Theological Commission of the Catholic Charismatic Renewal in Germany, which cannot perform exorcism but practices prayers for deliverance from demonic nuisance. The trial went to the heart of faith. If the Bible is true, then the miracles must have really happened, and Satan must be real. But it's not easy preaching the existence of the devil to one of the most secularized countries in Europe. A study by Research Institute in Freitas and published in the German news weekly Der Spiegel last month showed that even among churchgoers, approximately a third of baptized Catholics and half of baptized Protestants do not believe in life after death. I understand a complaint that German theologians are too rational, says Clemens Richter, professor for liturgical science in Munster. But exorcism is all about helping the sick. In Anneliese Michel's case, The sickness was supported. When I go to a patient and support her in her delusion, she gets the impression that she really is possessed. Exorcism is far more widespread today than most people imagine. According to Richter, there are about 70 practicing exorcists in France and just as many employed in Italy. In July this year, a congress in Poland was reportedly attended by about 350 practicing exorcists. Germany is the major European exception. Here, there are only 2 or 3 practicing exorcists, and though they have the approval of their bishops, they operate in secret. Secularization has the church in its grip, says Ulrich Niemann, a Jesuit priest, medical doctor, and psychiatrist who often has been called into exorcism cases by clergymen. We do a lot for the third world, but little for faith in a transcendent God. The German church is far too cerebral. Niemann doesn't consider himself an exorcist and doesn't perform the Roman ritual of 1614. As a doctor, I say there is no such thing as possession, he says. In my view, these patients are mentally ill. I pray with them, but that alone doesn't help. You have to deal with them as a psychiatrist. But at the same time, when the patient comes from Eastern Europe and believes that he's been impaired by evil, it would be a mistake to ignore his belief system. After the Michel trial, German bishops and theologians formed a commission to review the exorcism rite, and in 1984 they petitioned Rome to change it. The heart of the problem, they found, was the practice of speaking directly or imperatively to the devil, that is, I command thee, unclean spirit. That part of the rite seemed to do the most damage, since it confirmed to the patient that he or she truly was possessed. The Germans didn't get what they wanted. We were astonished when Rome issued a changed exorcism formula in 1999, which left open the possibility of speaking to the devil directly, says Richter. But you can't know for certain that a patient is truly possessed of the devil. Today, 30 years after Michel's death, with both exorcists and her father also dead, her mother couldn't be reached for this article. Michel is still revered by small groups of Catholics who believe she atoned for wayward priests and sinful youth, and honor her as an unofficial saint. Buses, often from Holland, I think, still come to Anneliese's grave. Barthel says, the grave is a gathering point for religious outsiders. They write notes with requests and thanks for her help, and leave them on the grave. They pray, sing, and travel on. Back in 1908, it was called Alabama Girls Industrial School, and Condie Cunningham was one of the students who lived on the 4th floor of the main residence hall. Late one night, Condie and her friends were using a burner to make hot chocolate in her room. This was against the rules, but Condie and her friends were doing it anyway. They were all sitting on Condie's bed in their nightgowns when someone accidentally knocked over the burner. The bed caught fire, and so did Condie Cunningham's nightgown. She began to panic and ran down the hallway screaming for help. Now, as most people know, running is the worst thing you can do when you're on fire. You're supposed to drop on the ground and roll around. But unfortunately, Condie didn't know that. She ran up and down the hallway screaming for help, and this only fanned the flames. The flames grew larger and larger, completely consuming her body. Her friends could only watch in horror as Condie finally collapsed and died. Her body was burned to a crisp. Ever since her death, Condie Cunningham's ghost has haunted the 4th floor of the old residence hall. Students living on that floor have reported hearing the horrifying screams of a girl echoing through the hallways. Others have heard footsteps running up and down the hall when no one is there. Some have even heard a girl's voice crying, "Help me." Late one night, a girl who was staying in Condie's old room heard noises outside her door. When she opened her door, she was shocked to see a fiery apparition running down the hallway. Its body burned and blackened as flames blazed around it like a human torch. When the girl went back to her room, she saw her bed was on fire. The next morning, she left the university and never returned. Of all the paranormal events that surround this girl on fire, the strangest is what happened to the wooden door of Condie's old room. Right after Condie's death, her friends said they saw the image of Condie's burning face appear in the wood. The school administrator had the door replaced, but Condie's face began appearing in the new door. They replaced the door numerous times, but every time, the image of the face came back in the wood. The girls were all so freaked out by this that, eventually, they just removed the door and put in a storage room. Even today, Condie's room has no door, and none of the girls at Montevallo University will stay in the room, so it remains vacant. The students who live there today still swear that their doors open and close of their own accord, and some have sensed the presence of Condie's ghost coming into their room. Her ghost has even been known to go into the shower areas and scream her head off. The girls say that when she roams the hall, she doesn't do it quietly. She runs and screams through the halls as if she is still on fire. Story 3, Bannister Doll. There was a teenage girl named Dorothy Bannister who lived with her father in an old mansion called Bannister Hall in the town of Preston in Lancashire, England. Her nickname was Dolly, and the local people called her the Bannister Doll. Dolly was a very attractive girl, and she got a lot of attention from young men. Most of the boys in the town were chasing after her. One day, Dolly went to her father and nervously told him she had something to confess. She was pregnant. When her father heard this, he flew into a violent rage. Seething with anger, he dragged the teenage girl out to the garden and chained her to a stone. Then, he whipped her to death for embarrassing her family. Years later, the stone where Dolly had been so brutally murdered was still standing, and mothers would take their young daughters to see it as a warning of what could happen if they got pregnant. None of the girls in town wanted to end up like the Bannister Doll. Dolly's body was buried in the grounds of the Holy Trinity Church at Preston, but the story doesn't end there. Not long after the Bannister Doll's death, the corpse of a young man was found lying in the center of Preston. His skull had been smashed to smithereens and his ribcage had been beaten to a pulp. The authorities were mystified as to how he'd met his end. 2 weeks later, the dead body of a second young man was discovered in similar circumstances. When a third young man was found dead, rumors began to spread around the town like wildfire. They said that the ghost of Dolly Bannister had returned from the grave to wreak vengeance on all young men for the way her father had so cruelly murdered her. Some people claimed that they had seen the ghost of a young girl in chains floating up Snow Hill at dusk. The sight of her terrified anyone who caught a glimpse of her. It was said that if you heard the chains rattling of a dark night, your days were numbered. After Dolly's father died, a new family moved into the house, but they didn't stay long. The ghost of the Bannister Doll appeared to them and harassed them for 2 nights before they left the house, never to return. Another family moved in, but they only managed to stick it out for 3 nights before they fled in terror. The Bannister Doll is still occasionally seen in Preston, and those who have seen her report feeling an aura of tremendous fear and chilling malevolence, a stark contrast to the shy and mild young woman she was in life.